Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. This is not an old cookbook show, even though there's a bunch of old cookbooks out on the countertop, and I'm holding one. A couple of weeks ago on the old cookbook show, we did a recipe out of this cookbook from the 1800s called Canadian Baked Beans. And in the comments section, there was a really good conversation going on about what made them Canadian and how that was different from people's interpretation of Boston baked beans or New England baked beans. We talked about Yankee beans. We talked about in the conversation in the comment section about fève au lard, which is a French Canadian dish, which is beans with salt pork or lard salé. And while that conversation was going on, I thought, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to go back through my books and I'm going to look at sort of the difference of what people perceive to be the traditional recipes and, what those changes are through what those changes are through time. Because something that I have learned over the course of owning all of these books and going through them is the more ingredients that you have, the farther it is from the origin point. Most recipes at the origin point have very few ingredients, and most of the recipes that we think of as traditional really only happened in the last 100 years. And for the most part, if you really wanted to narrow it down a little bit more, only happened since the end of World War II. That's when a lot of these recipes sort of solidified into what we now think of as traditional. So we're going to make a modern interpretation of fève au lard, but this is by no means the traditional recipe. So we're going to start out, obviously start it with beans. I soaked these beans overnight. If you wake up one morning and you want beans, but you've only got dried beans, do like I did in this recipe from a couple of weeks ago. You take the beans that you need, you cover them in water, you put them in a pot, you boil them for 45 minutes to an hour. That negates the need to soak them because you've softened them up enough that you can put them in your pot and bake them. And today I'm using white pea beans, Thompson's white pea beans. And I found it very interesting that a lot of the traditional baked bean recipes that are held out there, it's the recipe from the back of the bag. So these are white pea beans. You could use white Great Northern beans. You could use any bean that you like or that you have in your cupboard. So when you go back into the old cookbooks, this is La Cuisine Raisonnée, a French-Canadian cookbook. This one's from the 1930s. I've got a version here from 1967. The farther back you go, fève au lard, or the French-Canadian baked beans, pork salé, or lard salé, maybe some mustard, but not always. If you were a rich family, you had molasses. If you were a poor family, you had maple syrup. Those roles are reversed today. The richer people will use maple syrup, and those of us that can't really afford it would use molasses. I'm lucky enough to have maple trees in my yard, so I always have maple syrup on the go. Also have a lot of family members with sugar shacks, so always have maple syrup. The later additions to these recipes, and this is borne out also in the American cookbooks. So these are two American cookbooks from the 1800s. They have baked pork and beans, Boston baked beans, baked Yankee beans, Boston baked beans. These are the 1800s recipes. They are very similar to the French Canadian recipes in that you've got beans, salt pork or bacon, maybe some mustard, water. In some of these bean recipes, there is no sugar whatsoever. This is a Ford cookbook that recently came to my door from 1950, and it has what would be considered today the traditional Boston baked bean or New England baked beans, which contains all of these things like onions. Get those onions in there. A lot of people consider now ketchup or tomato component, so we'll get the ketchup in there. Next in some molasses. maple syrup. Ground black pepper. Mustard. Now I'm using a dried mustard. The farther back you go, dried mustard is the norm. Contemporary recipes today, I see a lot of people using prepared mustard like Ballpark hot dog mustard or mustards like that that are already prepared with vinegar. Really, it's up to you. Next in, I'm going to put summer savory because I love summer savory in baked beans. If you don't have summer savory, you don't have to use it. It's not necessary. It's just something that I like. Then we come to what I'm going to use is chicken stock. The original recipes, it's always just water. Although in one of the recipes, it does say use soup stock if you have it, preferably ham stock. And this is, I'm simmering away a ham bone here to make split pea soup later. So I could use that, but I want it for my split pea soup. So I'm going to use chicken stock, but water, straight up plain old water is really all you need. I'm going to put in that much just to cover them, cover the beans, and we'll stir it all together. Right, and using summer savory, I like to use summer savory in it. This is how recipes move forward. You make it your own. You find a flavor that you like and you use it in an existing recipe. That's how we get from the point where baked beans were just literally beans baked with salt, pork, and water, to the point today where we've got something a little more flavorful with a lot of competing flavors that sort of meld together over 4 or 5 hours in the oven. That's really important to move cuisine forward, is this constant change and trying different things. If you're static, you're dead. Anyway, so I've got salt pork and I've got bacon. And I'm going to use both because I've got them. So the salt pork goes in and the bacon goes in, skin side up. Lid goes on. Now I've got my oven set to 275. I'm probably going to let these cook 5-6 hours. I've still got some chicken stock here, or it could be water. Set aside. I'm going to check them every so often and add water as needed. You don't want them to dry out. You could put a piece of parchment over top like I did last time. You could put a piece of parchment over the entire thing and put the lid on to try to hold everything in. A piece of tin foil, whatever. I'm just going to come back and add liquid as needed. And if you're one of the countless people that asks me why my oven is so clean, it's because I keep it clean. And I just cleaned it for Hogmanay, so we're good to go for 2024. Okay, the bean pot has been in the oven for about 5 hours. And I'm going to pull it out. My plan is to take the salt pork and the bacon out, chop it up, mix it back in, and stick it back in the oven. Oh, that's looking really good. Okay. A lot of the fat from the salt pork I'm going to get rid of. And the same from the bacon. We don't really need that back in there. So all the fat, just get rid of that. Any of the fat that has rendered into the beans is what we really want. That's solid fat. Don't want that. So just a rough chop. I mean, it's fall apart tender at this point. It's been in the oven that long at a really low and slow temperature. And I mean, there's not much lean on this salt pork. Mix that back in. And then back in the oven with the lid off. Okay. Oh, big beans.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey, Jules.
Hey, friends. Baked beans.
Baked beans.
With bacon, salt pork. What do you got in there?
I've got salt pork and bacon. So this is This is the contemporary traditional.
Contemporary traditional.
Contemporary tradition. What most people today would consider to be traditional fève au lard or Boston
Okay.
baked beans.
Is this your version, or have you?
When I
Because sometimes I don't know, right? Like, you know.
when
That's what I'm asking.
when I looked up a bunch of recipes of what is contemporarily considered to be this, they all came out almost
the
the
same?
same. And then I looked on the back of the bag of beans, and that was the recipe that I was making essentially. So
That's funny. I knew you were going there. As soon as you started saying it, I thought, oh,
yep, it was on. It was. Oh, this will be hot.
it's like the shortbread recipe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the one on the box.
one on the box.
It's the one on the box. It's the one that works. So this is quite a distance from the baked bean recipe we did last time.
But I like that one.
I liked that one too. I really did. I liked how simplistic it was.
This one is a little sweeter.
A little bit sweeter. It's got ketchup in it, molasses, and maple syrup.
It's lovely though.
Yeah.
It isn't cloyingly sweet.
No, it's not cloyingly sweet. The onion and the mustard sort of rounds out the flavor. This is
pretty good.
I mean this is contemporary baked beans, what people think of when they think of northern baked beans.
That's good.
I really like that. I like the older version as well, because there you just tasted the beans and the salt pork.
Did it have vinegar? What had in it that gave it a tang? Was there something in it? No.
No.
I'm remembering something else.
No,
Okay.
there was-
Sometimes I get confused.
We do a lot of cooking. It's easy to get confused. I remember partway through the day I forget what I'm cooking, because today I did 3 things, and what am I doing? What am I talking about now? So when you're talking about those 3 things, fèves au lard, Boston baked beans, Yankee baked beans, New England baked beans, I guess that's 4 things. They all start in essentially the same place. And they all grow at about the same pace and become almost the same thing in the end, with varying levels of sweetness. This is a great recipe. I will put up all of these at the end of the video so you can kind of look at the progression through time. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.
I like the diagram, the
Yeah.
sketches on that.
Well, and that's a book that came last week, and it's from Ford Motor Cars,
Oh, wow.
and so it's a bunch of
It's
restaurants.
about going places.
It's about going places and eating at these restaurants all across the United States and Canada, and so they've got a New England baked beans, which is not too far from what I've done here. So by 1950, this sort of contemporary recipe had solidified.
There you go. I just like the sketches.